there. Hello, Mark. Let's see where. There he is. Hi, audience. Thank you for joining us. How is my audio? Is it okay? I had a problem before. Is it good? Like everyone
Good.
is hearing me. Audience, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Eduardo. I am a marketing manager here at Modern Sales Pros, and I'm so excited about this event. You're gonna get a lot of good key takeaways from those speakers. Um, let's start this event. I know they have a lot of content to drop on you, audience, today. So let's start. We are here today to talk about how to ramp up your RevOps teams. So we have a plan for you. And we got a fantastic lineup of speakers today to talk about how to ramp up your RevOps. And these kinds of insights you just find here at Modern Sales Pros. And for those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and finest community for more than 35,000 members. Can you imagine that? And all our members are in sales management, leadership, operations, and enablement. We are all about taking the road less travel and bringing you along for the journey. Our mission is to help to tackle tough questions and discover opportunities you might not even know exist. And we do this through vibrant live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have an engaging online forum and our must attend summits. And we are expanding to an array of in person events nationwide. So we might be coming to a city near you. Audience, let us know where you are in the chat, and then you might receive an invitation for a dinner or an event near you in the US. If you're not part of MSP yet, we will reveal your details after this event. And if you are a fit, we will give you an invitation to join our community. But that's enough about MSP. Let's talk about how to get the most out of this event. Please use the Q&A panel. I was talking with the speakers backstage, and they were saying like the energy is a little bit low this week. It's like the end of the quarter for some people, and what will energize them is to answer many questions. So use the Q&A panel and the chat to let us know all your questions, and we will be able to answer them. And also, this event is being recorded. So you will receive a follow-up email from me with the recording and key takeaways, and you will be able to access the video anytime in the future. One thing I didn't mention about MSP is that we have the best partners in the business. Um, and today, this event is sponsored by our partners at Everstage. I have Venkat here with me today. Venkat, can you introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about what Everstage does?
Thank you, Eduardo, for the kind introduction. I am Venkat. I head RevOps at Everstage. I'm a director of RevOps at Everstage. Everstage is a leader in sales compensation management market. We are ranked number one in Gartner and G2 with a rating of 4.9 out of 5 with over 1,500 plus reviews. We work with mid-market and enterprise companies to help them automate their sales commission process, improve efficiencies, drive insights, and also improve behavior through smart sales compensation. Uh, Before we proceed further, uh, I'd like the esteemed panelists to introduce themselves.
Great. Yeah, I can go first. So Sarah Brown, VP of RevOps, most recently at Weights and Biases. Prior to that, I was at Miro, Segment, and Twilio. Facebook before that, and like previously back in Hewlett Packard when the big machine. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Mark.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Yeah, Mark Whitlock, VP of RevOps. I work with Creedon, which is a sales organization. Prior to that, I've worked at Uline and Ace Hardware, and I bring a lot of experience outside of the traditional things, being involved in category management, pricing, master data, and systems integration.
Yeah, so I think before we get into the meat of the topic, I wanted to set some context around, why we are doing it and what is the relevance of it today. So from the time when I started in RevOps, or even operations to today, I think RevOps as a word has evolved, RevOps as a function has evolved a lot. And the place we are today is very different from what it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I wanted to, take your thoughts on where you think RevOps is currently and how you think, in your own words, it has evolved from where it was like 4 or 5 years ago when it's probably started.
Yeah, so I think like RevOps varies depending on the company you're with. Like I've joined 4 different companies in 6 years, and every single company RevOps has been something different. Sometimes it has the marketing element, sometimes it doesn't. I've seen a report to the CFO, COO, CRO. I think the team size varies. You see companies that have like 50 AEs and they've 3 RevOps people. And then you have some really sizable teams. So some companies I've worked at had 70, 80 RevOps people. So it's really company dependent. And I think one thing is like 10 years ago, it did not really exist. We didn't have necessarily SaaS. You had like support operations, you might have had sales operations, but now it's really cohesive and we just have this excellent seat at the table. And so I'm really excited to see it grow. It's great.
Yeah, I echo kind of what Sarah was saying. Like to me, I came across RevOps just a few years ago and really saw it as a way of common language for the organization, almost like a culture mindset. So, for us, the traditional pieces of broken silos or independent working teams that didn't fully understand the potential of the organization and what we were trying to do, the goals, objectives for our customers. RevOps really brought a foundational structure for us to work with. And so like I've seen it grow and change what the definition is. And I think that's what's really cool and powerful about RevOps is, it's that ability to not just stay the same, but to flex and change and to grow and kind of morph and customize into the business that you're in.
Amazing. Yeah, it's recently I've seen it being defined as the thing that runs the rhythm of the business. That was a really nice way to put it. So awesome. So probably getting into the actual kick off things. So what we are doing here, the 30, 60 or 90-day plan, the onboarding plan is really critical for someone entering into RevOps today, and also setting up sites on a leadership position down the line. So I wanted to start off by looking at what would a person do the first 30 days of joining a role in RevOps. Sarah, do you
Yeah.
want to?
Yeah, like I think step one is like you're the architect of this plan. So even the fact that they're considering like what is a 30, 60, 90-day plan is like a really great place to be. I think it's good to establish with the company if you have 90 days. I know that sounds like pretty harsh, but if you're in a really large company, it's granted. You're like, yeah, you have 90 days. Sometimes companies even like the first 6 months is all about building foundation. There's other companies that just move incredibly fast, where at the end of the 90 days, they want you up and running, like you're on. So I think step one is like really assessing like how fast does your company move? Like what is the expectation here? And then your job in the first 30 days is like primarily like listening, learning, and building relationships as much as possible. I think when you come to building those relationships, there's kind of two parts that I typically run. So the first 2 weeks is like a lot of time with your manager, maybe some of your peers, but mostly your own team and around you. I think that's a good way to spend the 2 weeks. I tend to hold back setting up any meetings with like very high level stakeholders until the latter half of that period. And really it's just so you can have a richer conversation, just more dialogue. And so I would like work really closely with your manager, your team, get all those meetings calendared, and at every single interaction, like ask that person like future connections. I think if there is like a large amount of stakeholders, one way that I've done it before is if you're so you're going into a meeting and it's like 10 person, it's a really big meeting, maybe 2 people. It's always a good time to even just put 10 minutes on the calendar of anybody on the call. Just be like, hey, I know we have this big meeting coming up. We haven't had a chance to meet. Can we grab 10 minutes just before the call so I can understand the projects you're working on, introduce myself? But really that first 30 days is about like building relationships as much as possible and then just learning the business, listening. And Mark, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to take that from the perspective of where you're starting, right? So I've been in organizations that have had, this like RevOps not established or haven't had that structure. So the approach in the 30 days for that organization is a little different. Now, if you have a more mature organization where top down's pushing RevOps, it's a different approach. I think to what Sarah said, like there's understanding and there's alignment and expectations within teams, but like at the end of the day, the fundamental piece is relationships, and without relationships and establishing really a communicative and supportive structure, you're not going to get anything achieved. Because at the end of the day, RevOps isn't just you; it's the holistic company that has to move and progress with it. And so, I really think, it's hard to say is that 30 days or 60 days. So sometimes if there's a lot of politics or there's structures or there's like areas of resistance, you've got to you may have to slow the pace of things and really kind of try to address each individual stakeholder and like objectives. So it really depends on the organization, but I think the fundamental piece of what Sarah said is spot on, right? The relationship, the people that get to know, making them understand that you're a partner to them, that you're a support, and that you ultimately have their growth and success of their teams at heart, right? So showing them what benefits you can bring them, helping them understand the value that you can bring to their teams, helping them achieve their goals and objectives is really a critical part. You're almost becoming a counselor to, counselor to the organization. And so humility, being humble, and being aware that you're not trying to like criticize where we're at, but like you're there to help find opportunities and then advance them down the road. So be an advocate.
Yeah, so building relationships is really critical. I kind of echo both of your sentiments there. But in my view, I think what has kind of thrown spanner in the woods in the last few years has been, the remote working and hybrid working. I have kind of found it a little tricky to navigate that. Like in person, it's a little different, and in remote, you have to make that effort to make those meetings happen. Like you have to block a calendar, and then you have to take initiative there, and that is something that has really worked for me when I joined this organization as well. It was still the tailwinds of lockdown and stuff like that. Like I had to step in, make that effort to block calendars, get a call in, and all that. Did you have similar experiences? Sarah, you're smiling.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always a weird one when you're trying to assess like how much time to put on somebody's calendar when you're really new. It's like 30 minutes can feel pretty long when you don't have a lot to share. 15 minutes seems like you don't think it's that important. So it's always like a judgment call. I think when you're building relationships in the first 3 days, like, the primary relationship you want to be building is with your manager. Like maybe you've worked with that person before, maybe you've been promoted, and that still comes in here, but like really having clarity with your manager on like what are their expectations, and really refining that as you go through it, as you're hearing things, seeing things, like pressure test that with your manager. Like, hey, is this an issue? How do you prioritize this? Because it's also, and we can talk about this a little bit later, it's also a time where you can find a lot of landmines. Like you might get shot off in one direction. This is the most important issue we have right now. And then you realize later it was actually not a priority at all. So number one relationship at this point is definitely your manager.
Yeah. So moving on to the next phase, right? So 30 days are done. You have like a layout run view of the different people. So I also sometimes do ask my team to do an org chart of the key people in my org. So that's also something I ask my team to do. But once that is done, what are your like next steps for the 30 to 60 day period, the second month or the second phase?
Yeah, I think part of that 30 to 60 days, and this is really specific to revenue operations. So, like, we're expected to be analytical in many ways. We're expected to understand the metrics, the KPIs, how that business is operating. At this point in time, you should be starting to get really clear on, like, okay, what are the main KPIs that we're tracking? What have those trends looked like over time? What is the definition of them? And then you're also starting to get a view of like the major projects that roll up into, like, ideally your company have OKRs or some strategic priorities, but that's where you're getting into some of the meat of it. And you would start to be questioning like metrics that you know already. So like if you're in like maybe B2B enterprise SaaS, you're kind of looking at, okay, well, what are the cycle times? Like what is your average deal size? Like what is the velocity that's going through the business? You're really starting to get closer and closer to those because you're starting to form opinions at this point. So you would want your hands on the data. I would say data and key priorities, projects for the work.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right? It's understanding the goals, initiatives, and expectations of each team, and then really understanding processes. And to your point, Sarah, like you kind of got to get into the weeds. So that's data, that's like understanding the steps and processes, and then making note of gaps or issues or problems people like bring to you as you're going through those steps to understand, hey, that might be a taboo area of the process that nobody wants to address because it's, there's some stakeholder that's preventing the progress there. And so it's really being, analytical in the process, starting to find like areas of opportunity to make improvements.
Awesome. And when you're doing this exploratory activity, obviously there's an itch to make some quick wins. What are your thoughts and where do you stand on quick wins?
I'd like beware of quick wins. Like every company I've gone into, they're like, oh, hey, there's low hanging fruit over here, quick wins here. It's never been the case. Like every time there's somebody close to that process, like, you know why you can't do that? Because these 10 other things that nobody knows are happening. So when you get presented, okay, I think one, it's really important to build credibility, like in the first like 60 days. Like you definitely want to build your brand. It's a great time to do that. But I would just tread with caution. You should come across the quick wins the exact same way you will come across somebody telling you I have a really high complex project that needs to be solved. Like look at the current state, look at the change that you want to introduce, identify the gaps, can you measure it? Okay, come back again. If you do all that and it's a quick win, that's great. Like you get to do that in your 60 days, but invariably you're going to find there's something there. There's a reason this hasn't been done before. So I would just tread carefully before you jump in there.
Yeah, 100% agree. I've been at companies where walking in the door, you could sense that there's motivation by like the executive level for change. There's higher ups that want change, but they have a disconnect with the people in the front lines of the company. And those are the frontline people are the people that are really going to get you to the truth. And so it's a little bit of poking around to that point of what Sarah said, like watch it. Cause there's reasons why something has never changed in the past. And those are your opportunities to really listen. Listening is a huge factor, and listening for multiple voices to understand like, okay, where and who is speaking the full truth of this. And then, working to address those pieces. Because I think a lot of times leadership, like if your manager, your leaders all have the right intent, they just might not have the perspective, or they may be biased by years of working in a certain area. So your value is, coming in with that preconceived ideas of how things are, but what could be. So.
Yeah, so there's a question on how do you prioritize what to work on first. It's a really nice question in the sense that so when I was a little younger, when I joined in certain companies as maybe like a fresher or just an early bird, I would typically have this bounce off my manager so that they have a better sense of what's what's higher priority versus low. So I would always have a manager show me a mirror on whether it's really a high priority or not before I took the next steps. Yeah. If you had other thoughts.
Yeah, I think that it's where, like, if you've invested that time in the first 3 days to build relationships, you have a sense of who's who and who's trusting. So once you write down your 90-day plan, you've kind of assessed the big rocks, and then maybe there's like the sub projects underneath. Then, like, being able to review that document with somebody is really helpful. Like, hey, this is what I'm seeing in the business. Is this also what you've seen? And I've had like really interesting
Sarah, I think we lost you
where
for a bit. Is it just
he's
me?
like, oh, hey, that's
Yeah, Sarah,
Yeah, we lost you for a bit there.
Yeah, maybe I could jump in there. I think kind of what Sarah's saying, I would reflect on that too, in the sense that, find out what those big boulders are that you want to attack, and then find out what those sub steps are going to be, and then trying to identify what those quick wins. Sometimes it's sometimes the win, or sometimes the first priority is something very subtle of like showing the group that you understand their challenges and their processes. And so what Sarah was saying, like, walking through that diagram of what you think the business is reflects that, hey, like, I get it. I hear you. I'm reconfirming that I hear you and I understand your challenges. And then and then trying to find something that within your control you can achieve, that's both addressing the executive goal or champion your sponsor, like that addresses your sponsor's needs, but also fulfills the needs of the people in the teams to hear like, oh, there's finally somebody listening and aware of it, and we're seeing progress. And so those are simple little wins before you try to revamp the sales process, or revamp like how you build commissions into your sales force, I think.
Correct. And at a leadership level, or the most recent way that I'd like to prioritize what I want to handle would be, I always have this habit of drawing out a rough map in a notepad or something to just see what these tasks and who are the dependents in terms of organizations and different business units. So I'd obviously pick up the ones that are high on impact in terms of the number of teams it can touch, and also in terms of the complexity, I would like to pick the lower ones so that I don't make big mistakes right up. So I can pick up the smaller ones and see whether my thought process is aligning with our goals. So it's just small wins, but it's not the quick wins that Sarah was asking you to be beware of. That's a different topic. This is more like, hey, I know these are the stakeholders, these are the small things that I can probably take a shot at and see how it goes from there, right? So I'd probably pick up things that are connected to most number of people so that I am able to start there with, again, building relationships. All those things will kind of come in a good cycle. But yeah, so moving on, I hear process, I hear people, I hear a little bit of tech as well. So how can the RevOps side make the most of the final stage, which is the 60 to 90 stage of onboarding, according to you guys?
Yeah, so I think here I'll speak a little bit more to if you're coming in as a RevOps leader. Now is about the time where you're kind of expected to have a good sense of your talent. And I would even encourage you, now is when you might do your talent review. And there's like lots of good frameworks out there, like even 9box, but that's where I'd start thinking about your org design. And you should know your biggest priorities now. So now you're like backing into it. Do I have the resources? Do I have the skills on the team? Do I have everybody in the right place? And you use your leadership team, so both your peers, your kind of more senior levels, to like figure out if you got the right org design in place. This is usually about the time you're expected to present that back to your leadership team. You should have a good sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like part of what, to continue with what Sarah said, it's about building that the roadmap to it, and like also setting expectations about how long you think it's going to take to achieve some of those aspects of that work, right? Because part of what you're trying to do as a leader in the RevOps group is also manage expectations. And so a lot of times, the leadership or other sponsors or other departments are, expecting some immediate change or some big thing. And so I think you always have to like be managing not only the RevOps effort, but also managing the expectations of the company so that it doesn't get out of control, right? Because it could easily get to a point where, hey, in 90 days, somebody is saying all these things like you should have solved all this stuff. Like this should have been easy. And so it's also about, managing your brand, managing your expectations, the delivery timeline of when things can be changed and how long you think it's going to take to change the business.
Yeah. Looking back to one of the comments that was you had made, what seems like a small rock could sometimes be a tip of the iceberg, and you would be like, oh, okay, I just stumbled on a very big problem. So 90 days is tricky, and one of I think the questions that is going to last forever is how is RevOps going to retain their strategic hat on while at the same time remaining tactical? And this is a question that I think gets asked many times. What are your thoughts on remaining strategic in spite of being tactical, 50% of the time or something like that?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because we like to go deep on problems, and I think that's what makes us like such a great asset in a company. And I think you should, like, as much as possible, try and search yourself in those strategic conversations. So if you have OKR planning, like you should be there. Like you should always have a seat in the room. Like you have such privilege of being able to tie what's happening on the ground into the bigger picture. So like OKR planning, any kind of quarterly planning. If there isn't anything, like now might be the time to start thinking about establishing that for your own team. One thing we introduced in one of our previous roles was like a monthly business review. Like you as a RevOps leader should have full agency to be able to do that. So like just start writing the doc, like write the doc. Here's the monthly business review. Here's what we saw happen in the business. Here's some of the bigger issues. So like either build it or insert yourself as much as possible to stay strategic.
Yeah, to me, it's about going back to the purpose, right? So, I believe in my company and the business that we run, it's about the customer and that customer experience and the customer expectations. And so, we're a service, a sales organization. So we don't sell product, but we sell our value proposition. And so the thing with that is it's always different for each customer that we serve, their value proposition changes, and it also is like shifting sand. So managing what that expectation is and delivering to that expectation is really critical. And so we think about, back the core thing of RevOps is people, systems and processes. And so as those things start to align and you start to see what your issues are, but there has to be tiebacks to, hey, this effort and this work, it has value for this customer. It has return on investment for this relationship, makes this relationship more efficient, and makes our business more, optimal. So, really knowing that and speaking back to every decision you make, every priority you set, everything that you're going to say is a number one goal should say it should have some return on ROI. It should deliver to value proposition and those aspects of it. So it's really kind of like, you can get deep, again, you can go deep into the task, you can get lost in the weeds. So you really have to be that advisor pulling everyone back up going, okay, remember why we're working on this. Remember why this is important.
Awesome. I resonate with a lot of points that you mentioned in terms of doing a lot of deep dive into, numbers that would again give us back some insights rather than, doing tactical work. Well, Sarah, there's a question on one of your points about business reviews. You want to pick that up?
Yes, there's a question coming. So the question is, any tips on how RevOps can work or support on a change management when processes are not well defined? And I think that is the work to be done, is to define it. So way back, I'm kind of experience in Lean Six Sigma. I would recommend, if you're in RevOps, I think you could probably take a yellow belt over the weekend. It's a really good kind of grounding to do, but really step one of any kind of process improvement is define. So if you do define, measure, analyze, improve, control, that is, and once you've done it a few times, you always come back to it. So step one, defining, and there's multiple techniques to how you can do that. The most effective one I've ever found is that staple yourself to the process. So go sit with the person who does the process, go sit with the teams, watch the handoff, just staple yourself to the whole thing, write it down, get the current state. And pretty much once you have the current state and you know the vision, then you can start to fill in the gaps. But this is just a great way to just learn more, pick up some new skills as much as possible, and start working out how you're going to define that process.
Yeah, like that. I was just thinking of one other thing. It's ask a simple question of why. Why do you do that? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because you really start to discover either one or two things. People really don't know what it is that step or that activity is doing, which tells you something. But then it also helps you understand maybe where the disconnect is even in the process. Because you're going to find, a lot of times you're going to find as you go through different teams, you're going to, one team does it one way, another team does it another way, and another way, right? And you start to find, well, the main cause of why things aren't efficient is because everyone has their own definition of what should be done, but that can't always be the case. So.
Awesome.
I think it's Aileen. I don't want to mispronounce your name, but I think you had a question on, can I dive into a little more on, so it was a monthly business review. It's my Irish mumble. But the monthly business review, so again, I think you can tailor it for your company and your team. But the way ours would be structured is really kind of first view is what are your top KPIs? So they would kind of hold the banner. And then what's the exec summary? So if somebody was just going to pick up the first page and they could only read a paragraph, what would you want them to take away? So imagine it's your CEO, your CRO, somebody at that level, on how the business trended in that month. Then you can go deep dive into the metrics. And again, this is dependent on your type of industry, but I typically start at the top of the funnel and work my way down. So, okay, what happened around leads and marketing? Okay, then you're moving into what happened in terms of deal conversions, then how did we do in deal operations, close one business, and then into anything that's post-sales. I just find that flows really well. And another thing I do is when I just write it, I freeform write it and leave the metrics just as X's or reds until you finish it, because then you have the narrative kind of close. And then you can go back and have an analyst or somebody else help go fill in the gaps. You want to keep it to maybe 2 pages. I can try find some templates online if it's helpful and share it after, or maybe the MSP team can share some. But it's a really good, effective way to show you're strategic and to start highlighting what's happening in the business and identify those gaps.
Awesome. I think a lot of those are even tips for me to take up. Awesome. Uh, what is the best first step in proving or showcasing that RevOps department is valuable within your organization? Okay. So I have some thoughts on this, but I'll let the forum take it first.
Mark, do
Yeah,
you want
yeah.
to take it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was just having a meeting today with some departments, and so like for RevOps in our world, like it's an evolving function and role in the company, and so like we've been starting to we've taken a little bit of different approach because we've been around for 40 years, and I started implementing RevOps about a year ago and talking about it, building the conversation and the vocabulary, and now we're starting to sit in cross-functional team meetings where you know we're starting to bring insight or changes in thought process on how teams interact, how teams need to cross-functionally work together to get the most efficiencies out of what we're trying to drive. And so, I think it's about that. It's about kind of what Sarah said earlier, sitting in the room, listening. It's like it's building on all those things, but like now that you've got some sort of buy-in and credibility, now you can start to speak from a RevOps standpoint. And what you're going to start to find is, especially when you're in cross-functional groups, is like you're going to start to see teams that maybe felt like they were silos or that they were conflicting with each other. You're going to start to see each other as like a team or part of the group, and it's really kind of really cool to see that by using the vocabulary of RevOps, you start to see people working together, or teams that maybe didn't work together start working together. And that's just what I've seen here in my company. And it's been more of it's really odd. It's a culture shift. It's a mindset shift. It really starts to build about teamwork, and it's a great way to build a company up.
Sarah, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, somewhat. I'm more kind of thinking through like the things not to do. I don't know if we want to transition over that a little bit. So, because you kind of move into these RevOps roles in the first 90 days, like where I've seen, so I've started at 4 different companies in 6 years, but I was hired like a bunch of RevOps people, and where I typically see things go wrong is one, kind of coming in with assumptions that you know how it all works, and you kind of very quickly move to telling your teammates how things get done. Like that tends to not go down that well. They've been working incredibly hard. If we're in startup land, like they're usually like close to burning out, they're exhausted, so it's probably not the best thing to do. The other thing is just kind of coming in and getting really tactical really quickly. You're so eager to kind of show that you know what to do here and that you've been really successful in previous roles, so like you just like dive right in. Those are kind of the main things that I see, is just people coming into these roles tend to kind of fail like quickly, and it takes a little bit of pulling back and a little bit more coaching to get them on the straight and narrow.
So what I have kind of realized in 2 or 3 roles in the past is, uh, in terms of proving and showcasing, I don't go in with that mindset. I probably look at what we discussed here, the 30-90 day thing, 30-60-90 day thing. So the first 30 days that I do is actually something that what we spoke about, building relationships. I make sure I actually talk to everyone, respect them for what they have done so far, and then have them on my team rather than having to prove a point to them, and then have that collaborative energy flow through and start problem solving as soon as I see things falling in place for me in terms of how things look like, and then build trust by solutioning, problem solving, winning trust and all that. So I think the relationship in the first 30 days, that's worth its weight in gold. And then you don't need to really prove your metal to anyone or prove your team is there for a reason for anyone, because in 2 cases that I've joined, there was no ops team, and then like I was the ops team, so there was a lot of pushback and, hey, why do you want me to follow this process? There was no process before this and all that. So
Yeah.
that's something that has kind of worked for me. So yeah, just my two cents there.
Yeah, and I was just thinking there was like another aspect of that is sometimes your voice isn't the right voice to bring the message. And so like a lot of times we use experts from outside the business. And so like I would say everyone on who's listening today, like one of the best ways to deliver a message might be through Sarah or myself, right? Like or some other influencer within that you can rely on, because what I've also learned is people don't want to hear the same thing from you all the time, right? So if it's coming from another person, sometimes it's just more credible. It's like when you have children and you're their parent and you're teaching them sports, they listen to you, but like the coach could say the exact same thing and the kid gets it because they're listening to someone else and they're open to it, right? So I think that's a critical factor. So we use that a lot of times in our company where we'll go find somebody to deliver the same message, but it's not coming from us, so it's less challenging. And so another tool that you can do is that.
Awesome. If there are any more questions, yep. Eduardo, I think this is over.
Yeah, maybe from outside, like people out there, like that are listening, like what are you challenged by, or what don't you like? What next steps are you looking to do that you might want to know more about? Like if you could throw something in the chat, we can maybe bounce some ideas
Sure.
off each other.
I see here that Felicia sent a question. They said, what metrics, in your opinion, would be the best to show how RevOps have worked in the past 90 days?
Yeah, I can kind of jump in. So I think the one thing is it's highly dependent on your business and on your company. So I think before I give you just metrics that have worked for me and my business, like it's important to understand like where's the strategy for your team? What are the OKRs for the team? What are the biggest programs or priorities that everybody's focused on? But if you're in B2B enterprise and it looks pretty standard, like I think you want to pick, like I tend to just follow the funnel. It makes the most sense to me. So like I'm looking at like, okay, what is our pipeline growth? And ideally by source. So again, look at your business if you're like primarily like partner source, or is it inbound, or have you been pushing a new outbound motion? So start there. Again, work with the teams. I think any leader is going to be pretty impressed if you come back with a KPI dashboard that shows that you've gone out to each of the leaders, you figure out what's their main priorities, and you've pulled it back into something. And then I kind of work down through middle of funnel and like start looking at, that's where you're more into like sales productivity. So what's our cycle time? Like what's our stage conversion rate? And what's our win-loss rate? Things like that. And then you're getting down into like, okay, close book business. And then like, okay, what's our average ACV? What was the time to close? Like things like that is where you're starting to get more closer to the metrics. And then if you can trend it, so look at it like month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, like depending on your business, like that goes a really long way, being able to spot where there's trends. But again, like work with your leadership team. Like if you've just gone international, that might be a really critical KPI to start looking at. Okay, can we see these metrics split by geo? As an example, and if you just started pushing an outbound motion, that might be you might need to go a couple of layers deep on outbound. But just straw man it first, then work with your leaders, work with your peers, and get a sense for are these the right KPIs to be focused on, and then slim it down because you're going to start with too many, and you're going to have to pull back to make it reasonable. But yeah, I wouldn't try. I think one thing to avoid is sometimes I see RevOps folks get lost in the designing of a Tableau or some BI dashboard. Like just straw man it first in a spreadsheet. Just make it really simple. You can always automate it later, when you have more time and resources.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? Like you can identify 5 or 6 core metrics that you can really do identify that are all the way through the sales experience, that customer journey or aspects of that, and you can identify those and bring those up. That's going to be critical. I also saw this comment in the public board is like it's harder to do this, or it's more challenging to implement RevOps with a company that's successful. So like how do you approach a successful company different? And I think to me it's around risk avoidance, cost avoidance, and then profit, right? So like there's a number of times when even if you're successful, it's about that continuous improvement opportunity. And if you can identify like, hey, this is a risk, or there's a potential, hey, this is successful, but a lot of times companies that are successful also are blind to the underlying problems that exist, and we saw this during COVID where there was like massive sales growth in our organization, but at the same time it was hiding problems that existed, inefficiencies or things that were not operationally sound. And so success is sort of like two-edged sword. You should always be asking like, okay, maybe there is success here, but like, what are the risks? What are some possible underlying inefficiencies, and trying to identify those things, because that will help identify and give clarity to things that maybe people aren't paying attention to at an executive level.
I think we have one more question here from A. I have found it more difficult to bring RevOps and process changes to a company that is seeing a lot of success. Do you approach a successful company differently?
Mark
Yeah,
just addressed that, I think.
kind of
Mark
touching that.
addressed,
Yeah, I
Mark
will,
addressed that question just now, Eduardo.
Awesome. And Felicia has a question. What have you found is the easiest way to get teams to follow new processes that you have implemented?
well, yeah, Sarah, you go ahead.
Yeah,
I
this is a
guess.
good one. So I think this goes back to kind of like as much as possible, see if you can like look at different kind of frameworks for around change management. The most important one here is like kind of the why. Do they understand like why you embarked on this? Like, do they have the context about why this is important? So that's the biggest thing. If you can help establish the vision and the why, that is where you'll get that buy-in later stage. And like I think Mark mentioned earlier, which is a really great point around like who are the influencers around you? So like who in the org carries weight that can help you get this across? But yeah, go back to like change management, figure out the why and go from there.
Yep, I totally agree with that. It's like the North Star, right? Like, what's the North Star of why we're doing this? And then lean on, like in that 30-day process, you're identifying those people that are like influencers within teams, people that have the strongest voice, and that you need to be your advocate. And so, like, part of this reason for building the relationships is, before you implement some big change or you do something, you're kind of like pre-vetting things with them. Like, you're going to them as like a test of like, hey, what do you think about this and this? And they can be almost like your advocate to like soft sell some of this into it beforehand. The other aspect I would say is like, well, don't implement anything that you haven't already involved the team in developing that process, right? Like, you're not some sort of like guru of all processes, right? Like, at the end of the day, the team and the frontline people are the people that already know 90% of what works. Like, you're coming in there to make it more efficient. So they should be part of the team building this new solution or process.
How do you get AEs to use Salesforce?
Yeah, we have a
Awesome.
question from Justin. How do you get AEs to use Salesforce?
I think this one it has to be tops down. I mean, it's a very difficult role for RevOps to try drive this. Like, you need the sales leadership team bought in. So make sure your CRO, your head of sales is bought in to why we want everything captured in Salesforce. And then that should funnel the whole way down. Like, I think forecasting, you actually have a lot of the tools to make it sticky as well. Like, if you own the forecasting process, it's right there. Like, you're going to be like, well, it's not in, I can't run the forecasting process because it wasn't in Salesforce, or things weren't updated in Salesforce, therefore I can't fill in the forecast this week. Like, you actually have a lot of the hows to do it, but most importantly, get your CRO on board and get the sales managers on board. Yeah, I thought those days were gone. Every company they use it. I'm like, oh no, there's still some companies trying to get there. But yeah, that's what I'm not.
Yeah, I agree with that, right? Like, regardless of the system or the tool, like, it's getting people to do it is about them understanding the why and the purpose of it. And then, as you create those KPIs and metrics, it helps you manage that's getting done and achieved, and really, and then make it transparent, right? Like, the best thing to do is not fight it, just make it an agreed goal and objective, and then expose it to the companies so they can see what and who is, maybe causing bottlenecks or not implementing the information, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'd like sit in their shoes for a day, like go through the Salesforce experience.
Yeah.
Like, it might be the case that you've put in validation rules in every stage. You have like 40 fields that need to be filled out and they don't know why they're filling them out. And then just walk the process and just like experience it for yourself. If it's a really bad process, it's kind of on you to redesign it to make it not so bad. And there's lots of good tools and tech out there now where you can create workflows from, I don't know if you've like gone to Slack into Salesforce, like, but like look at the core process and see if you can make it a better experience for the rep. And like you can do like think tanks with the reps, like maybe once a month, get a small group together, get their feedback, work with the systems team. You can actually bring a lot of value there if there is a negative Salesforce experience. Like my last few companies, there shouldn't be. Like, I've seen where reps are actually fine to update it because you've kept it as simple as possible. And so just like revisit the experience, I would say as well.
Yeah, I'm looking at some questions. I see Rachel has a good question about startup looking to develop the launch RevOps. I guess I kind of was in this boat myself where the term RevOps wasn't even a concept within my company. And so, what advice do I have? It's got to be a journey. So like if you think, you really have to assess the ability where everybody's at in your executive group that can understand this, but then you almost have to create a sales pitch and a roadmap to sell the idea and concepts. And so what I heavily did was I relied on thought leadership or other groups to speak to each leader, and I kind of made I made personas of each of the people I had to influence. I came up with a strategy of what I had to overcome. And then individually, I communicated a direct message that was tailored to that person so they could understand it. And it literally took like a year because like, that's not the full-time job that they're going to sit and listen to you babble on about this RevOps thing, but it's exposing them to different things and then helping them understand the value of it and how it's going to bring value to them, right? Like at the end of the day is, RevOps is a connection of sales operation and business operations. And so, if you can make the sales like objectives and goals more, help them see the benefit of like the connection of RevOps as the efficient process to make sure all the execution happens around the things that they need done, they become your champion. And then you start to get other voices speaking to it. And so, you'll know when the company is ready for RevOps when other people start explaining to you why RevOps is important. And that's like that. And that's what I did and I waited till that happened. And once the president of the company started saying like, hey, we need this, this is what's critical. And like, they started talking about it. Then it was like, all right, let's implement a RevOps team. So.
All right, can everyone hear me? Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we don't have any more questions coming. Audience, thank you so much for your participation today. We love answering all the questions. Speakers, you are all brilliant. I'm so glad this is recorded so our audience can have all this knowledge handy in the future. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you, Everstage, for sponsoring this event. If you like what the speakers and concept today, there's a memo with our sponsor button at the top of this page. You can click it and just see the average stage getting touch soon, and you can see the magic happens. Um, while the speakers and I hang out backstage, the MSP team will make sure that you audience receive a follow-up email with the link for the recording. The templates that Sarah mentioned, I'm going to grab them on my end, and also the key takeaways from this event. Speakers, thank you so much. Everstage, thank you so much. Audience, you are the best part of MSP. I love seeing you here, and I'll see you all next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.